Welcome to Module 5. All of your preparation, self-discovery, branding, research, networking, has now brought you to the point of interviewing. Yay! Let's get ready. In an interview, your main purpose is to answer a simple question. And that question is, why should I hire you? If you don't know why they should hire you, why should they? So your goal during an interview is to be very convincing about why you're the best candidate for that job. Sub-goals within that are to establish your value to the company, determine if the job is right for you. Keep in mind that, yes, they're going to be trying to determine if you're right for them, but this is a two-way street. So they may think you're the best thing since sliced bread, but the job may not be right for you, and if that's the case, you need to be prepared to walk away. You also want to differentiate yourself from other candidates. If you think about it, if you and 3 or 4 other people are interviewing for the same position, all of the candidates are likely to have the same skill set and a similar background. So what is it about you that makes you just a little bit different from those other people? And finally, you want to make a connection. I often ask clients to think back to a position that they were hiring in the past. Maybe they had 5 resumes sitting in front of them of candidates that they were planning on interviewing. Maybe number 4 is the best one on paper. But almost to the person, everyone has said that they don't necessarily hire the best one on paper. They hire the person, obviously, who can do the job well, but who's also going to be a good fit within that company culture, be easy to manage, easy to get along with, a real positive influence on the team. So it's important, just as we talked about in networking, to make a connection with the person with whom you're interviewing. The interview is your opportunity to solidify your brand. Normally, by the time you get to the point of interview, the employer or hiring manager has seen your resume, they've seen a cover letter, maybe they've seen some things on social media. Now you have to prove it. Anyone can write a really solid resume, but clients and employers tell me that they've interviewed people in the past where they're looking at their resume and then talking with them, and there seems to be a disconnect. And so when you sit in front of somebody, it's your opportunity to show that you really are everything that your branding documents say that you are. It's about first impressions. Research says it takes 4 minutes to make a first impression. Now, if you've hired people in the past, you know that you don't know whether you're going to hire them in the first 4 minutes, but in the first 4 minutes, you certainly know whether this is going to be a long conversation or a short conversation. You also have to prove your competency. Are you able to do the job and all of the requirements that are involved in it? And then the third bullet is personality and fit. And you'll notice here that I have question marks beyond, should we move that to the top? In Austin, personality and fit is maybe more important than the other 2 bullets. There are companies now that are actually doing what they call fit interviews. If you interview with Google, the first time you go in, it's a fairly normal interview, but subsequent to that, the next interview, they're going to ask you to Googlefy yourself, or maybe they say Google ties, but they want to know something about you outside of what you do professionally. So for those of us who have been raised that there is personal on one side and professional on the other side, and never the two shall meet, that doesn't really hold true anymore in Austin, Texas in the 21st century. They want to know about you as a person, and so you have to get comfortable of knowing where that area is between the right balance of professionalism and being personable to really show the employer that you'd be a good fit and that they would be a good fit for you. When you're called for an interview, it's very important that you know exactly what you're interviewing for. It's hard to prep for an interview when you don't know what it's going to be all about. I'd like for you to keep this list of questions right next to your phone so that whenever you are called, you can go through these questions with the person who is scheduling it so that you know how best to prepare. First of all, for what position will I be interviewing? Now, this may seem obvious, but maybe not. Maybe you've applied to more than one job within a particular company and you're not sure which one they're calling about. Or maybe you applied to one job that the employer determined you weren't the best fit for, but they passed your information on to another hiring manager who had another position open or another position coming open down the road. You want to make sure that you know exactly which job you're interviewing for. Then you want to ask if there are any changes to the posted job requirements, or ask them if they can provide the most recent version of the job description. so that you can use that to prepare. Ask who's on the interview team and what are their titles. You want to be able to do research not just on the company, but on all of the members of the interview team. In that way, you know how to connect with them. Remember, you need to find something that maybe you have in common with them or something you want to talk about them to make that connection first. You also want to ask the format. Is it one-on-one? Is it a group? Is it something that you're going to be doing on the computer? You're going to be prepping for each of those in different ways. If it's a one-on-one, the advantage is you get to build rapport with each individual person. The disadvantage is that person then holds your career in their hands. If it's a panel or group interview, you have to think about how to talk to people in the same room at the same time. To me, a panel interview isn't really a panel. It might be 5 individual interviews that happen to be occurring simultaneously. If it's an interview that you're going to have to be sitting in front of a computer to do, you want to make sure that long before the interview that you're able to log into whatever system it is that they want you to log into for. You want to make sure that the audio on your computer is working. You want to make sure the video is working. And you want to look to make sure that everything that is within camera view is something that you don't mind having a future employer see. Ask what you should prepare. Many interviews are not just talking anymore. They will ask you to whiteboard something, or maybe they'll give you an assignment to come in with. And the last thing you want to do is show up for an interview unprepared if there's a certain deliverable that they've asked. Finally, ask how long the interview will last. I encourage people to try not to do 2 interviews in one day. Even if one is early in the morning and one is later in the afternoon, the human brain can only keep so much in there at one time. And so you want to give your brain a rest overnight to make sure that you can keep the 2 opportunities separate in your thought process and that somehow they're not getting confused in the course of the interview. Don't worry. If the interview has to be put off 2 or 3 days, that's okay. Sometimes when we're not working, we feel like we have to jump at it and say yes as soon as the employer calls and says, we'd like to interview you tomorrow. But you want to make sure to put yourself in the best position to do well in that interview. So give yourself some time. If they're not willing to give you 2 or 3 days, if they want to interview you right now or never, then chances are that should put up a red flag for you that something's not quite right with this role. Once you know the scoop, it's time to prepare for the actual interview. First of all, you need to look at your resume and make sure that you know which resume you sent to the company. I always encourage people to save their resume using the name of the company and the job title. Because you're going to be tailoring your resume for each individual opportunity, you want to make sure that when you're preparing for a particular opportunity, you have the resume in front of you that the employer has in front of them as well. You also want to make sure that you've tailored your elevator pitch or your team aid for the occasion. Don't memorize it, but you do want to practice getting the words out of your mouth in a way that sounds confident and is very fluid. You want to develop a list of meaty questions for the interviewer. These should be non-self-serving questions. At this time, it's not questions about when do they plan to hire or how many people are they interviewing, anything like that. It's questions that show that you've done your research on the company. You're asking questions about their future. Maybe you've read something about a competitor. Maybe you have read that they are looking at going public. You want to ask questions that show that you know more than the average bear. The questions that you ask may be the actual differentiator that get you hired over someone who seems to have only been looking at the company at the surface level in terms of being able to do the posted job. Finally, you want to determine your attire and how you'll present yourself. In former times, we all thought we go to an interview in a suit. Well, in Austin, not so much. Sometimes if you show up for an interview in a suit, they're going to assume that you haven't done your research and you don't know about them. If we look at this continuum, I think everyone would agree with this. For Austin, we want to shift everything basically to the left. That middle thing that you see on the screen right now is probably professional, and then business casual, and then maybe even more so. I've had lots of people show up for interviews where the people interviewing them were in shorts and tennis shoes. You always want to dress a notch higher than whoever it is that you're interviewing with, but you don't want it to be so high that they think that you don't know them or that you wouldn't be a good fit. It's not a bad idea to ask whoever calls you to set up the interview what the appropriate attire is. That way you know that you can show up looking like you're a fit and that you know what you're going in there for. Once you get in there, you're likely to experience several different types of interview questions. The first are the disqualifying or screening questions. These are what I call the arbitrary weedouts, things that are going to make it real easy for an employer to put you in the no pile. They're going to ask about education, certification, years of experience. The routine questions, strengths, weaknesses, why are you looking for a job right now? All the crazy questions, if not human, what kind of animal would you be? Recently, I had someone ask how many razor blades are sold in Austin, Texas on any given year. Keep in mind that there really is no right or wrong answer to these things. The companies are looking for how you address the question. What's your thought process? And then, of course, the salary question, which we will cover in Module 6 when we start talking about money talk and salary negotiations. Once you get past the screening interview questions, then there are some more common questions that you may be asked. Why should we hire you? As I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, if you can't answer that question for them, why should they hire you? You really want to think here about outlining the specific ways that you meet the position, but then also being able to give them those one or two nuggets about you that may be different from any other candidate for the job. Secondly, you'll be asked what your weaknesses are. Here, you want to start with something maybe that's a real weakness, but then say it in a way that comes across positively. I tend to shy away from those answers that sound canned. Things like, oh, when I'm at work, I just get so nose to the grindstone in my work that I forget to take breaks. You know, I'm not sure that I buy that, and it sounds canned. A better way to think about it, again, is to think about an actual weakness that you have and talk about it in a positive way. For instance, mine would be that I don't like having things hanging over my head. So if I have a Friday deadline on something, my part's going to be done on Tuesday. And sometimes I get frustrated that everybody else on the team doesn't get their part done by Tuesday as well. So I've managed to be able to step back and recognize they're going to get it done on time. It's going to be fine. It's going to be very well done work. It's just not on the same timeline that I have, and I'm learning how to deal with that. You want to choose something that's not going to cut you off at the knees. You don't want to say that you're in business development and sales and that you really don't like people very much. Next, why did you leave or are you leaving your last job? Again, you want to be honest in this one without giving too much information. If you were laid off, just simply say I was part of a layoff. Sometimes this question, because people worry about answering it, leads you to talk more than you normally would. And you wind up giving a really long response. Rather than just being very succinct, get to the point, no big deal, and move on to the next question. In giving that long response, you actually may be opening the door for them to ask some more follow-up questions that are going to back you into a corner. And lastly, you don't have experience in this industry. How do you expect to be able to do the job? This is sort of a trick question. If you're sitting in front of someone or on the phone with someone and they're asking this question, obviously, it's not a big deal, or you wouldn't have gotten this far in the interview process to begin with. So you want to talk about times that you've made changes in the past and how you've successfully done that. And just let them know that you're flexible, you'll learn quickly, you don't expect this to be any different. Beyond the basic common questions are what we call situational interview questions. These make people nervous for some reason, but to me, these are actually easier than the common interview questions. Because all you're doing is telling your professional story. Tell me about a time when, or how would you do this? This is a great time to refer back to those success stories that you wrote way back in the self-discovery module, because in there you have specific examples that you can use. One thing to be a little bit careful about is you want to make sure that you pull your examples from multiple different situations. Sometimes in an interview you get locked in on talking about one big project that you were a part of, and so every question that you answer, you're referring to that same project. You want to have 3 or 4 or 5 different things to talk about so you don't look like you were a one-hit wonder and that you were able to replicate results across a variety of settings. Now, I know that I just talked through these very quickly. The good news is, in your module packet, You have a list of the 72 most common interview questions and potentially how you might go about answering those, as well as pages on what we call the core competencies, the situational interview questions, dealing with things like teamwork, being ethical, those kinds of things. And so there are lots of examples in the module packet for you to review. Just as we discussed when we were talking about networking, during an interview, you've got to focus on the interviewer's needs. It's not about you. Keep in mind that the company is in hiring mode because they need someone who fills a certain role in that organization. The more you can get to the bottom of what they need, the more you'll know what to emphasize about your background that might be most appealing to them. You want to listen actively. Key into maybe what their pain points are or what they're really looking for. Build a personal connection, just as we talked about with the networking. You want to speak from a positive perspective. Let's say that the company wants you to have project management certification, PMP certification, and you don't have it. And they say to you, do you have project management certification? Rather than just saying, no, I don't have it, but, you'll say, I have extensive experience in project management and I'm knowledgeable about all of the aspects of the PMP certification. You're not coming out and saying you have this certification, but you're not saying you don't. And as soon as you say the words no, but, they've shut down. All they've heard is the no. So when you're asked about something that you don't have, focus on what you do have that is similar to it or peripheral to it. Ask dialogue starting questions. We talked about the questions a few slides back. Based on the research that you've done, what can you ask that will help you to learn more about the company, more about the position, more about their needs, that gets a conversation going? You want an interview to be more a conversation than an interrogation, where questions and answers are going both directions. It's not just a situation where the employer is asking all the questions and you're expected to provide all the right answers. And then you want to set a second meeting at the end. As the interview starts to wrap up, you want to go through a series of steps to make sure that you are crossing T's and dotting I's. First of all, get your questions answered. You will have gone in with list questions prepared, of course, and in the course of the normal conversation, all of those questions may have been answered. Well, there's one that I still want you to ask that maybe you haven't asked yet, and that question is, what concerns do you have about me in this job? You may be thinking, oh my gosh, but what if they do have some concerns? Great. That gives you the opportunity to address those concerns before you leave the room. If it's a concern that maybe is a deal breaker, better to know now than being hired into the position and then being let go not too long later because you didn't have a particular skill that they thought that you needed to have. Secondly, you want to reiterate your interest in and fit for the position. This may be kind of doing your tell me about yourself statement over, but tailoring it based on the conversation that you've been having in the course of the interview. Be bold and ask if you're a candidate. They may say, well, yeah, next steps are coming up. Great. So then you ask, what are the next steps? And start to schedule those things down the road. Or if you ask if you're a candidate and they say, well, you know, we've interviewed a lot of people and we're probably going to go a different direction, then it brings up that question again, well, what concerns do you have about me in the job? Keep in mind that not every job is going to be the right fit for you. And you are not going to be the right fit for every job. So don't be worried if you don't have everything that they're looking for. Just be you. Basically, interview rules are out the door. They don't exist. All you need to do in an interview is be nice, be honest, be positive. On the being honest, keep in mind that this is not the same thing as telling the whole story. Again, the more uncomfortable you are with the question that's being asked, the shorter and more concise your response ought to be. You don't have to say everything. You want to really establish trust during an interview because it helps during negotiations. And don't go into an interview with any expectations, good, bad, or otherwise. If you go in with negative expectations or worries, then you're likely to experience the self-fulfilling prophecy where all of those things that you're worried about happen because subconsciously you make them happen. If you expect really great things and you come out of there thinking, oh my gosh, that was the best interview ever, I know I'm going to get an offer tomorrow, and you don't hear from them that next day, then you're going to go into a tailspin. So go into interviews with an open mind, very prepared, see if this is a good fit. I will tell you that when it's the right fit, it will seem easy. There will be no uneasiness, nothing in your gut that's saying, that just felt weird. When it is the right fit, you will know it. Once out of the interview, you want to send individualized thank yous to every member of the interview team. I had a client who was interviewing for a position out at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, and over a course of 2 days, she had interviewed with 28 different people in 7 panels. And she called me from the Knoxville airport and said, 28 thank yous? And I said, you betcha. Again, it may be those thank yous that are the differentiators. Thank yous have become a lost art. You want to write a longer, more detailed thank you to the hiring manager, outlining all the ways that you fit the role. Then to each member of the team, you want to write maybe a shorter email that simply mentions something that they brought up. Another question that I didn't mention a little while ago is that it often helps to ask the interviewers what they're looking for outside of the job description. It gives you more information about what they're looking for, but it can also give you real solid information to put in a thank you that shows each individual that you were listening to what they said, listening even to the point where you brought it up again in your thank you. But thank yous are critical, and they go to every person on the interview team. At this point, it's time to stop and complete the assignments for the interview Module 5. Next up, money talk and salary negotiation.